All right, guys, welcome back. Now we have to proceed with the second question. This is still your exam question. It is 2015 and it reads, it says illustrate the information in a Venn diagram. All good literature students in the general art class, all good literature students are in the general art class. That is the first statement there, and they say use this diagram. After illustrating it in a Venn diagram, you are supposed to use the Venn diagram to determine whether or not the following are valid or not. So watch. First, it says Vivian is a general arts class. Vivian is in the general art class, therefore she is a good literature student. Number two, Adu is not a good literature student, therefore he is not in the general art class. And Kwiku is not in the general art class, therefore he is not a good literature student. Now we want to solve it using the Venn diagram according to the instruction. The question says this is supposed to be solved in the Venn diagram, so we're going to look at good literature student and general art class. So I'm going to use L for literature student and G for general art class in this case. So now let me define L for literature, and G for general art class, So I want to draw my Venn diagram. Yes, so now we said the word all means all the good literature students are in the general art class. So I'm going to draw two, and you tell me which one is supposed to embed the other. So we said all literature students are in the general art class, so we have the general art class there, and the literature is the small circle L. All the good literature students, so let's call it good literature students. Good literature students are inside the general art class, so L is all encompassed inside the G class because all the good literature students are found inside the general art class. So it means the general art class circle swallow the good literature student circle. So it's all of them in there. So that is the first question. It says all illustrated in a Venn diagram. That is the first question. That's the Venn diagram. Now we want to use the Venn diagram to determine whether or not the following are valid. So like I told you, this is a simple way of solving this kind of problem. So you now find there are two portions in this circle. This time you have two rooms. You have A room somewhere there, B room somewhere there, and you have C is supposed to be there, and we even have another room outside the Venn diagram. So but we want to just concentrate on inside this. So let me define the portions. A contains all general art students. The general art class is a general art class, that is A. It is inside that general art circle alone, and B is inside both the general art and the literature. So we have room B contains all of that. Like I told you, just define the rooms and you try to identify which characters are inside each room. So it's easy for you to now come and find the questions. So let's go with the questions now. The question says Vivian is in the general art class. So it implies therefore she is a good literature student. So Vivian, first of all, is inside the general art class. So if you are in the general art class, the general art class is the G. This is the big circle there, and inside that circle, the general art class, then you can find out that all the letters are embedded inside. So if all the letters are embedded inside, so let's come and now look at the conclusion. Then it says, therefore, she is a good literature student. That statement is supposed to be invalid because there is a portion outside the literature students which is inside the general art class, but they are not inside the literature student. Like A do not have literature student, but it is inside the general art class. So because I said inside the general art class, you have the two letters A and B are in there. So both of them are inside the general art class. But you can be inside the general art class, you are not inside the literature class. So that statement becomes invalid because she says, therefore, she is a good literature student. So that does not make Vivian a good literature student by have been inside the general art class, because in the general art class you have a portion that is not a literature. They are not doing literature, they are inside here, but they are not inside the literature circle. So this statement becomes invalid. This is invalid. So I go to number 2. Number 2 is Ado is not a good literature student. He's not a good literature student. So therefore, he is not in the general art class. So let's look at, it says, it's not a good, if you are not a good literature student, then you are going to be inside A, because literature students are here, but you are going to be somewhere there. So it is this part of it outside the literature circle. There is a portion A which is not part of the literature circle. So because we said, therefore he is not in the general art class. They say Ado is not a good literature student. It means Ado is not inside the literature circle. But if Ado is not in the literature circle, Ado can be inside this portion. So, and this portion includes general art student. So this is telling you it is not, therefore he is not. It means he should not be here. But it's possible that since the guy Ado is not inside the literature circle, it's possible that he can be here, but he's inside the general circle. In this part which is out of the literature circle is still inside the general arts class. So you cannot say that this guy cannot be here. This Ado can still be here, and this question says he is not supposed to be there. So because this question says he is not supposed to be there, and Ado can be here, for as much as it's not inside the literature circle, he can be outside the literature circle, and A is outside the literature circle, then Ado can be inside that A. It makes this statement invalid. It is invalid because it is possible that Ado can be here, and he's going to be a general art student because he's outside the literature circle. But this question says not in the general arts class, so that is not correct there. It is not valid. So let's go to the other one. Kweku is not in the general art class. Kweku is not in the general art class. If you are not in the general art class, so there is no way you can be a literature student, because all the literature students are inside the general art class. So let's watch the statement. It says, therefore he is not a good literature student. That is correct, because if you are going to be a good literature student, you have to be inside this general art class, and now you are not inside the general art class. It means that you are not a good literature student, and that statement is valid because therefore Kweku, he is not a good literature student, because all literature students are inside the general art class. And now they said Kweku is not inside the general art class, so it tells you that Kweku cannot be a good literature student. So it makes this statement valid, and this one is valid because he is not a good literature student. So this one makes it valid. So have invalid, invalid, and valid. So now you can you can give me time again. I draw another question for you so that we can also go through that. So watch out how it's done here. First, I say you identify, you draw the Venn diagram first, and you try to identify the kind of personalities that are inside each room. And once you get that, it's easy for you to answer. You see, it's easy. In this kind of question, you just need these words, either valid, invalid. That's how you have, that is the reason why you have to actually think of your answer properly before you insert it, because one wrong answer can cost you so much, because it is only it's only one word, valid or invalid. So that's how you have to think about it properly. So let's keep going as we go to the other different way of finding the validity of a statement. We have already done the validity of a statement using Venn diagram. That's what I've also given you. All these questions we are solved using the Venn diagram. I want to give you another way of finding the validity of a statement using implication. So let's move as to continue the whole stuff. So keep watching. Alright guys, welcome back. We back. We want to still continue moving with the logical reasoning, and remember where we came from. We were able to discuss the validity using the Venn diagram. Now we want to look at another method of finding the validity of a statement by implication. Now is symbolic implication is given by the following. So you can have, let's say, P implies Q, or X implies Y. It could be M implies N. In this case, all these statements that are the first letter are called the antecedent. We have the antecedent. And you have the other statements that are here, which follows, is called the consequence. The consequence. Now we have the antecedent and the consequence. So now it is as a result of one. It is P implies Q. Symbolically, it's telling you if P is available, then it implies Q, or Q is got from the implication of P. So how do I interpret this? Let's say, for instance, if I say Africa is a rich continent, So let me represent the two as P. The first is the P, that is the antecedent, and now the consequent, let's say Q in that case. So now I can talk about this, I can reverse, or I can give an alternative form of the sentence in another form, without starting with Africa at all. So I can say, if you have said that P means Africa and rich continent is Q, and you have said Africa is a rich continent, then I can also say a poor continent cannot be Africa. So we can say a poor continent cannot be Africa. So what's the meaning of that? It is the same sentence, but I've said it in another form. So I can come back now and see how I can find the validity of an implication. How is the implication valid or not valid? I'm going to name all of them. The implication is only valid when the consequence, the negation of the consequence, implies the negation of the antecedent. The negation of the consequence implies the negation of the antecedent. When that happens, that statement, that implication is going to be valid. What do I mean by that? When the negation of the consequence, this is the consequence, that is the second statement that follows. The first one is the antecedent. Now, if the negation of the consequence is implying the negation of the antecedent, then that statement becomes valid. So how do I get the negation? Negation of Q is written as negate Q, you know that already. So the opposite, negate means opposite. So the opposite of rich continent is, the opposite is going to be poor continent, because I'm negating this rich, so it becomes negate Q, that is poor continent implies Africa, not Africa. This is not Africa, it's the opposite of Africa. Africa is or is not Africa, or cannot be Africa. It's an opposite of this. So the opposite of this is this. So this can become negate P. So this statement is the same as this, and it is valid, and its validity is based on the fact that the when you try to negate the consequence and imply it to be the negate of the antecedents, then the validity of the statement comes out. So this is the only valid submission from an implication. So we can say, I can draw something, a table here. So the valid assertion for an implication, and you have the invalid assertion. We have valid and invalid assertion of the implication. Every implication that has, or a combination that has negate the Q, that is the consequence is being negated and implies the antecedent, the negation of the antecedent, then that is the only time it becomes valid. Any other combination now is going to be invalid. So for instance, if I say negate P implies Q is invalid, Q implies P is also invalid, negate P implies negate Q is also invalid. So we have all invalid statements. It's only valid when you have the negation of the consequence implying the negation of the antecedent. That is, the negation of the consequence is implying the negation of the antecedent. When that happens, then we'll have a valid statement. Any other statement that is not this makes or renders the whole statement invalid. Now you know when to assert a valid and invalid statement. So let's look at this statement. We use it to solve WAS 2013. So our only valid conclusion from an implication is this. Any other combination is all invalid. So let's look at the first one. We say Martin trains hard is P. Martin wins the race. Now if P implies Q, watch out, it is different from Q imply P. But here, if the first statement implies the second statement, then let us use it now to find the validity of the following. So watch. Martin wins the race is Q. That is, Martin wins the race is represented by Q. So this is Q. Then it implies that he has trained hard. He has trained hard. Martin trained hard is P. So this combination, let me be writing the solution here, so we'll tell you, we'll see how it is. So number one, it is Q implies P, which is this, which tells you it is invalid. So this is an invalid assertion. So this one becomes invalid. Number one is invalid. This is invalid. So let's go to number two. Number two says Martin does not win the race. Martin does not win the race. So if you check this, win the race is Q. So does not win the race is going to be negate Q. So we'll be using small letters in this case. So negate Q, because I have negated this Q, and I go back to the last sentence, case he has not trained hard. Has not trained hard. Train hard is this. So has not trained hard is negate. Look at this. This is Martin does not win the race. Win the race is Q. Does not win the race is negate Q. And this one says then he has not trained hard. He has not trained hard is P. So he has not trained hard, or he has trained hard. This is okay, so he has not trained hard. I draw it. This is he has not trained hard. This is train hard is negate P. So what I've done here is negate Q implies negate P. So this is valid conclusion because you have this assertion. This is negate Q implies negate P. That's what I've got here. This is Martin does not win the race. Win the race is Q. So does not win the race is negate Q. And has not trained hard. Train hard is P. Has not trained hard is negate P. So that makes the conclusion valid because we said the assertion is this and that. So let's go to number three. Number three, this is number two. Negate that implies negate P. Let's go to three. Three says Martin does not win the race. Martin does not win the race. What is win the race? Win the race is this. Martin does not win the race. So Martin does not win the race is negate Q implies Martin it implies he will not win the race. Martin does not train hard. Sorry, this is negate P. Sorry, this is it. Martin trains hard is P. So Martin does not train hard means negate P. And now he says, therefore, Martin does not train hard means negate Q implies then he will not win the race. Win the race is Q, so he will not win the race. So you can see the assertion here. He will not means opposite. Win the race is Q, so will not win the race means is negate Q. So it is invalid. If you check it here, this is the assertion here, which is also invalid. This is invalid. So have an invalid assertion. Because it is not this. It is only valid when you have this combination, when the negation of the consequence is implying the negation of the antecedent. So let's go back there one more time. You see, I said first one is Martin wins the race. That is Q. That is it. Martin wins the race. Then he has not trained hard. He has trained hard. He has trained hard is P. So that is Q implies P, which is an invalid assertion. So it makes the statement invalid. Let's go to number 2. Number 2 says Martin does not win the race. This is win the race. Q does not means negate. So it's negate Q. Then implies he has not trained hard. Has not trained hard. Train hard is P. Has not trained hard means negate P. So it is negate Q implies negate Q, negate P. Negate Q implies negate P, which is this one, and it makes it valid. So that statement is valid. So this is valid. And we come to the last one, which says that this Martin does not train hard. Train hard is P. So does not train hard is negate P. Implies he will not win the race. Win the race is Q. Will not win the race is negate Q. So it is implied. This is negate P implies negate Q, which is also an invalid assertion because it is not this. It is only when you have the negation of the consequence implying the negation of the antecedent, it makes the statement invalid. That is, negate Q implies negate P. So if the assertion, if the sentences or the statements or the propositions were X and Y, then we can also say the valid conclusion from this will be negate Y implies negate X. That makes a valid conclusion. Every other combination is going to be an invalid conclusion. If as the statements were in M and N, then we say M implies Q. It means that negate M implies N. Then it means that negate N implies negate M will give me the valid conclusion. Any other arrangement gives it an invalid conclusion. So this is how you find the validity by implication. You just need to look at which first letter came, which is the antecedent. This is the consequence. It is when the consequence is negated and it implies the negation of the antecedent, it makes the whole statement valid. Otherwise, any other arrangement now makes it invalid. So this is the solution to 2000. This is a private WARS exam. This is 2013, and I'm now going to write one question for you, which you can also use as an exercise, and you solve it on your own account. So thank you for watching, and keep subscribing, and I bring more videos. So let me give you the assignment that you can also solve during your own leisure time. So thank you for your audience. Let me just move to the assignment now. I just clean this board for you. I'll write the assignment for you, which you can also solve. I have been doing the talking. I want you to also interact now. So this is the assignment for you. I just write it here, and you also find a way to find the validity here. So this is WAS. It is still your question. It's WAS 2015. 2018. So this is 13. So let me look at 2018. So for 2018, I just draw it for you. You say consider the following statements. You say P. You say Landing has cholera. Landing has cholera. So Q, Landing is in the hospital. Landing is in the hospital. So we have that. You say if. You must have the implication in the question before you apply implication techniques to find the validity. If P implies Q, that's the meaning. So let me use the capital letter. If P implies Q, then find the validity of the following. So I'll just write the questions because of the marker, but it says that use it to find if P implies Q, then find the validity of the following. First question, if landing is in the hospital, then he has cholera, then he has cholera, then he has cholera. Okay, number 2, it says if Landing is not in the hospital, if Landing is not in the hospital, then he doesn't have cholera, then he does not have cholera, right? So number 3, it says if Landing does not have cholera, then he is not in the hospital. If Landing does not have cholera, then he is not in the hospital. So we have, alright, so now I wanted to give you this as an assignment, but let's solve it because of time. You have the first example so far. So look at it. It is Landing. I use another pen to identify. This is P. Landing has cholera, and Landing is in the hospital is Q. So it says this P implies Q. So let's see the valid statement. Watch out for this. It is only valid if the antecedent, if the consequence, the negation of the consequence implies the negation of the antecedent. So that is the only valid conclusion. So let's go with this. This is if Landing is in the hospital, Landing is in the hospital, that is Q. This is Q. Then he has cholera, implies he has cholera is P, implies that. And this is invalid because it is not that. So because it is not this assertion, then it makes the first statement invalid. First question, this is invalid. Now we go back to Landing. If Landing is not in the hospital, Landing is in the hospital is Q. Is not in the hospital must be negative Q. This is negative Q. This is negative Q. Then he does not have cholera. P is has cholera, so does not have cholera is negative P. So this is negative Q implies negative P, which is a valid assertion there. This is negative Q. Let me use the capital letters so I don't get to confuse you. Now this is negative Q implies negative P, so it makes it valid. So this number 2 is valid. This is valid assertion. Now we go back. If Landing does not have cholera, this is if Landing has cholera is P. So if Landing does not have cholera is negative P, implies he is not in the hospital. Landing is in the hospital is Q. So he is not in the hospital is negative Q. So this is negative P implies negative Q, which is not this. So it makes it also invalid. So we have invalid, we have valid and invalid. So invalid, valid, invalid are the answers here. So you now look at it and try as much to figure out. The whole technique here is to know when an implication is valid. An implication is only valid when the negation of the consequence is implying the negation of the antecedent. That is the time we conclude that this particular implication is valid. So watch out. Any other arrangement now renders the implication invalid. I just want to look at the validity one more time. So we said you can be valid, and an argument is valid when the conclusion is drawn from the support of the evidence, and that's what we need in a court. We can't just say this guy is guilty. You must bring out the evidences, and those evidences are what we call the premises in this case. And when the premises are supporting the conclusion, then we say that argument is valid. That is what the lawyers look for. They ensure that for first you have to get an evidence. If you say this man is guilty, which is the conclusion, which is drawn from the premises, then you must support your claim that he is guilty based upon the fact that he did XYZ. So those XYZ are what we refer to as the premises. So once the conclusion is drawn from the basis of the premises, then we term that conclusion as a valid argument. So you must be able to look at a valid argument and invalid argument, and by extension, an argument that is valid can also be classified under deductive and inductive argument. A deductive argument, let's call it that way. So what is an inductive argument? Inductive, I said, it is that kind of argument in which the truth of the premises does not absolutely guarantee the truth of the conclusion, and that is inductive argument. What about deductive one? The deductive argument is the truth of the premises absolutely guarantees the truth of the conclusion. That's why we call them deductive arguments. So you must be able to distinguish between deductive argument and inductive argument. And now we'll be able to look at how do we ascertain the validity of an argument. We said we can use two approaches. One, we can find the Venn diagram approach. Venn diagram, you have to draw the Venn diagram and try to identify. In trying to draw the ovals of a Venn diagram, you must be able to look at first these terminologies, understand them properly. What is all? When I say all lazy students are this, you must know that all means that all the circle must be embedded. The small circle must be embedded inside the big circle. So there should be a total overhaul or a combination of those circles. All means one circle is totally inside the other. And we also want to establish the word most. Most means intersection. Some means intersection. A few means intersection. Many means intersection. And we have the third part of it, which we said none. None or no means a disjoint set. If you say no boy is a man, so we know that boy is separate from a man, so we cannot combine the two. This circle for boys cannot be the circle, cannot mix the circle for men. No boy is a man. Man circle is different, boy circle is different. They call it disjoint in set theory. So you must be able to identify these three terminologies if you want to tackle the validity of an argument using the Venn diagram. And I said that I have developed a simple approach for you to identify the validity based upon the Venn diagram. You just need to draw the Venn diagram and you try to allocate portions on that Venn diagram, label them. You can use letters, you can use names of things or objects, and that particular portion in the Venn diagram, you have to make sure you identify the character of that Venn diagram. And once you identify the character of the Venn diagram and the portions in the Venn diagram, then you can look at the statement. If the statement has a question mark, meaning there is one of the statement that do not cohere with what you have said in the Venn diagram, it renders the whole statement invalid. Otherwise, it's going to be a true statement. So I want you to actually look at it again, and in summary, we were able to look at the second part of the validity, which was implication. We said we can find the validity of the statement based upon a Venn diagram, and we can also use the validity. We can also find the validity using the implication. And we now said that the implication is only valid if the negation of the consequent is implying the negation of the antecedent. When that happens, the statement is said to be valid. Any other combination is now rendering that particular statement invalid. So watch out for the simple technique I've given to you. Watch out as we bring up more videos for you, and I thank you for your audience, and keep watching. Subscribe. Thank you very much.